Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Thank you so much for meeting me so early.
Yeah, no problem. Well, I felt bad that I had to push it back with the eye appointment and everything.
Oh, yeah.
So,
We're always busy, especially with children. My wife and I are working opposite schedules right now, and it's just someone's got to be with the kids. So it's tough to get all the stuff you need to do in a day finished.
right. Yeah, definitely.
So you just want to just jump right in? I've got a little introduction and then,
Sure,
okay. Um,
sure.
and is it Keelan?
It's Kylan.
Highland. Sorry about that.
Mhm. Oh, no worries.
My last
I'm
name.
used to it.
I bet so. Yeah. When I was a kid, I used to mumble a lot, and someone would ask me my name, and I'd say Joseph, and they'd say Josh, and I was so shy I would never say anything. So somebody would just call me. I had a teacher one time that first couple of months of school called me Josh. Even though she had the role, I guess she was like, well, she was a little confused, but I was too. um,
Oh, that's funny.
yeah. Um, so we're going to start here. Hi, I'm here with educator Alex Keilen, who teaches K-5 integrated computer skills at Socrates Academy here in Matthews, North Carolina. Alex has been in the profession for 15 years and has been so kind to work with me on all the logistics to go into doing a project like this during the busy summer months. So thank you for that. And it's a pleasure to finally meet you and put a name to the face. So to start briefly, will you just tell me a little bit about yourself, your role at Socrates Academy, and maybe a little bit about Socrates Academy as well?
Sure. So this will be my fourth year at Socrates. And I've really enjoyed being there. It's a charter school. So it has a neat culture because it's a partial Greek immersion. And so there's a lot of staff from Greece, and then there's American teachers. And so there's there's just a nice feeling of the Greek culture all around the school. So it's a neat little home, and it's a little bit of an alternative from, the surrounding CMS and Union County, because we're like right there on the border. And each year, my role at Socrates changes a little bit. So this coming year, we're kind of switching things up like so many schools have, of transitioning from just like computer skills and really focusing on like the STEM skills. And so I'm going to be heading up what's called Innovation Lab, and we're going to work on kind of like the engineering design process, do a lot of maker space type things, and really work on kids' problem solving skills and critical thinking skills and creativity.
Okay,
So
yeah, I
I'm
saw
excited.
that in that paperwork you were so kind to send me. Um, I started seeing how you were working in a technology area, and that was kind of one of my questions about. So it's kind of like a blend of a makerspace and what did you call it? Integration
We're
or
naming it the Innovation Lab.
innovation lab. Excuse me. Uh,
Yeah.
Let me grab one thing real quick, please.
Okay.
About that, my pen ran out of ink on me.
Oh
Um,
no.
so I guess I should have gone with pencil to begin with. Um, that way, in case I make mistakes. Um, so you mentioned it was a charter school. That was the one question I didn't put in here, but could you tell me kind of your ideas on traditional school versus charter school and maybe how you feel about the voucher program?
Yeah, I mean, I love a traditional public school. That's what I grew up with. That's what I wanted to teach in and have taught in for many, many years. Um, what I feel about charter schools is that I think there is a place for them. I do think it needs to be limited. Um, you know, in the area that we are at Socrates, we have a waiting list for some of the younger grades, but we are surrounded by overcrowded schools
Hmm.
in both Union County and in Charlotte Mecklenburg. So I don't feel like we have taken a lot away from regular public education, which I do, care about a lot. What I just found with the charter school is one with kind of my more unique role out of the like homeroom classroom is that I felt in the traditional public schools due to my degree being like elementary education. I found it really hard for anyone to be willing to give me a different role, even if, the principal talked about it being a possibility like
Right.
earlier on. And so a big piece of it was being allowed to do something different. And at the time, I also liked the flexibility because I do feel like charter schools can be the yesteryear of public schools. The strain on teachers in a regular public school right now with the testing and the expectations is just, I think, way too out of control. And I felt like at a charter school, there'd been more of a reset of caring more about the child. And I don't know that that's necessarily every charter school.
Mhm.
I feel
Everything.
like, unfortunately, we are trying to stay in line with our nearby public schools. And so we keep on adopting things that the regular public schools are doing in the same kind of expectations. Um, and I think that is something that we should try not to do.
Right.
So I think a lot of the teachers that are here at the charter school are people that are tired of the regular public education, meaning the teachers,
Hmm.
um, and all the expectations. So,
What's the classroom sizes roughly there at Socrates?
so we have a cap of 20,
Uh-huh.
which I also really love. Um, I have been fortunate in my career and have lucked out and typically had under 25.
Okay.
Um, there's so many, and I usually have taught the upper grades of elementary. And that new legislation that came out at some point where they tried to lower the class size for like the younger kids
Mm-hmm.
really just ended up putting way more of a burden on the upper elementary. It's just interesting how intentions
Yeah.
um get muddied. And so, I mean, some of my good friends that taught fifth grade before the pandemic, I mean, they had more than 30 kids
Hmm.
in a classroom, like fifth graders. And it's just like, that's way too many kids
Yeah, you don't get the
to take
individual
care
interaction.
of.
I understand. I was looking at exactly what you were going on. I was looking at how they tried to lower the ratio, but still allowed for that three-person buffer. And a lot of schools were still having to get like a 23, 25 to 1. And then I was looking down the road here as I kind of wrap up this degree, just to kind of see what jobs are out there and what other school structures are, especially for this class in particular. But um, there are like private schools like Charlotte Christian Day and Charlotte Catholic over there. They have a 8-to-1 ratio, and as long
Oh,
as we
wow.
have these kind of disparities, the equity movement's really not going to do anything as far as helping in the broad sense that we talk about. Because if there's certain children that are getting that 1 to 8, that individualized attention, while other children are getting the 1 to 30, and just sheer numbers and time and people, you can't give everybody the one-on-one. like that. I know that me speaking from experience and going to public school and overcrowding, when I went to undergrad and um, chose English as my undergrad, we had about 10 kids in a class. And I remember thinking how, wow, a lot of my other friends were in like huge seminar classes with 100 students, and how if it wasn't for that 10-1, I don't think I would have made it through undergrad. I needed that individual attention. And I think we'll kind of talk on that too. I'm going to kind of start going through the script so as I don't monopolize all your time today.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
But so I'm just going to kind of read from go straight down through the list here.
Okay.
So we kind of touched a little bit about your role, your idea on charter schools and traditional schools. So I want to kind of get into some other opinions you see with facing education today. The first, what are the main issues you see affecting education in general, or your school specifically? We already talked about other overcrowding, but what other issues do you see?
Yeah, and I was gonna say that and not even 100% overcrowding, but definitely a piece of it. But many years ago in CMS, I feel like a lot of things happened um, after there was the recession, and kind of a lot of funding was pulled back from schools, and it was kind of considered like do more with less. And we have still not gotten back the level of the number of people and resources that we had that pre-recession. And I feel like that's a huge piece. They keep on saying do more with less. Like we had a couple of interventionists back then, and we were able to work out a time that every day we had small groups with some teachers assistants that helped them with the math or the reading that that people needed. And once the recession happened, we never had that kind of support and assistance anymore, but we were told we better make sure there's
Yeah.
interventions, and we better make sure that we have it documented. And so it's like they're telling us to do all that stuff or even more of it, and then there's nothing to give us to help. Just the resources that used to be there. Schools have just been kind of stripped of any kind of like a book, or anything that makes it easier for a teacher to prepare lessons. But then they're expected to obviously do a lot with the content. And the other big thing I would say is just, other than like that level of pressure and all the expectation teachers are supposed to follow through with, and it is kind of due to underfunding and overcrowding and not enough getting enough personnel, is basically the testing stuff. I mean, it's just they do things like I'm blanking out because the school year's out. We have the NC check-ins, that's what they're called. Have you heard of those? So years ago, they came up with this thing called NC check-ins, and there's 3 of them, and they're supposed to replace the EOGs. They're supposed to be shorter, they're 25 questions, and so they're more like a check-in than the entire content by the end of the school year. Well, unfortunately, what has really happened, instead of the EOG being replaced, districts are using the NC check-ins to make sure that kids are on track to do the EOGs the way they're supposed to, and keep up the pressure and analyze all the data. And then the kids also have to take the EOGs at the end of the year. And like, they have been like, they were being piloted for quite a while. And then like, I just haven't heard one word in the last couple of years of them being gotten rid of, or the EOG being gotten rid of, yet the original purpose was less testing, and truthfully, it's just created more.
You
And
think
so
that?
I can't even see that at the charter school level. Like when I first started there, they didn't have any like regular testing. And then the first year I came, we did 2 times this thing called the NWEA MAPS test, and it's like a national standardized test. And so then after that first year it was like, no, we have to do it 3 times a year. There has to be the beginning, middle, and end, you know. And truthfully, I don't even understand that.
Right. Yeah, you kind of touched
So
on that a little bit when you were talking about initiatives and statistic gathering for kind of admin support. But at the same time, when it comes down to the front line, if you don't have the resources, you don't have the time to do all this testing. Like, because what I kind of maybe what I kind of read into what you sent me is you, as an educator, you care about more about teaching a child how to think, not what to think. You know, like as in you put together lesson plans that really get them engaged so that they can use their own deductive logics to find answers. And that's immeasurable in testing, I would think. I don't know.
well, yeah. And don't you just feel like in the end, that's what's going to make them successful in life? I mean, when I've had to teach things, there's so many things that were on the content standards that I was like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
never learned that myself. And I've got to research it and figure out what it is. And then how do I teach it to these young kids when it's
right,
sometimes like college level content that they want like a fourth grader to understand. And
exactly.
so, you know, are we building kids to be able to do that themselves? You know, and that's what I think is more important too. Like, can you learn yourself what it is and digest it and understand it, become that lifelong learner and everything?
Right.
So,
Yeah, we hear that term a lot, lifelong learner. And the only way to do that is by projects where you have to structure it yourself, decide where you're going to go with this project, and then map out the steps you're going to take to get to that conclusion. So, with that being said, and I guess I kind of know your answer a little bit, but how do you feel about standardized testing? Or, like, more importantly, I guess, or more to the point, there's a movement along, amongst a lot of educators to move to like that no homework methodology and kind of move away from this standardized testing. I don't want to lead you in your answer, but just kind of tell me what you think about that.
I do. I actually have more mixed feelings about standardized testing than maybe my initial, you know, sound might be. I definitely think it has got to be scaled back. Um, if you see those sweet little third graders, um, taking that EOG for the first time, and they're so little, you know, um, and then their fear of not passing, you know, the high stakes of it. It's making me emotional.
I understand
Um,
that. Yeah.
I had to help with some kids taking the retest this year, and these things that they say to you on the way there and on the way back after they're finished. You know, they have so much pressure.
They're,
They're like, I think I might have made it this time. You know,
mm,
my teacher said I just had to get one more right. And I really tried hard, you know.
yeah,
So
you,
that part clearly breaks my heart. But the fifth grade science test was introduced while I was teaching fifth grade. I had been teaching for several years with no science test. And then out of nowhere, they decided that there should be a science test. Um, and I can see the change and the focus that will happen with that. You know, like basically before there was the test, I looked at the science standards and I tried to fit them in within language arts and everything. And I tried to do some cool stuff with it. But I also knew if I didn't get to every single thing, that it wasn't a big deal, you
mhm.
know? And so um, I think statewide, there being more teachers knowing that they really had to teach that science content is helpful for science in general. So I don't know what the answer is, because still within the younger grades, because there's not like a science test, then it's like, we feel more pressure at fifth grade because we're having to make up for things that they didn't totally learn in science because it was so much of a focus on math and reading.
Mhm.
So I just would like kind of that high stakes aspect to be taken out somehow. There not being that level of pressure for the kids and the teachers. Um, but I do see a place for it and like a check-in of there being some accountability, I mean, I get it. Um, the problem is the kind of things, they say stuff like, well, our third graders can't read, they're not passing these tests. I talk about this a lot with my dad because there's just so much like noise in the media, I feel like, that makes it sound like our schools are awful and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
kids know nothing,
Mhm.
And I'm like, it's so disconnected of the reality of what's going on. And if most college graduates sat down and had to take even like the third grade reading test, be
Yeah.
like, wow.
Yeah. I
And
know.
so that's where I just think we need to be like, third grade is here,
Perspective. Yeah.
let's see that kids can do this. And that's what's considered passing. And we want to push them, um, and learn and do so much more and do the critical thinking skills, but that shouldn't be checked on on the test kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah, a little more balance is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
So in your experiences, what's the most challenging part of your job, and what's the most rewarding?
Um, I guess the most challenging part of my personal job is that I have to coordinate a lot of the testing at my school. Um, and so that's dealing with the technology devices and the setup and the timing. Um, and then in general, I also have to help with technology issues for the teachers, which of course is outdated stuff and things like that. Um, and then of course the most rewarding time is always being with the kids and you know them being excited about what we're doing, and particularly if it's actually academic and they ask me if they can research their thing more or can they do that again at home or work on it at
Yeah.
home, and this is just like their specials rotation. It's really sweet, so to spark their interest is the most rewarding for sure.
I can definitely understand that. I have so many stories. I work at the public library here in Charlotte,
Oh, cool.
and I'm part of the maker space at our South Park branch,
Oh,
and
wow.
so I love to see that. Like we had, kind of going on what you were saying. We get these guidelines, and it's like you can't do a program unless you check all these boxes. And if you look at it, you're like, well, how in the world am I going to have one program fit this whole, like, it runs the gambit of just what you need in your technology program. And so then you kind of have to manage back up the hill and say, well, what about we check two out of these three boxes or something like that? But then they'll see that we're not having programs, and they're like, well, why aren't you having these programs? Well, we can't because of the guidelines you said are so confining. So
Mm,
I have always had a little bit of a devious mind where I'm always tried to look, here's the rule. Can I get this far outside of that rule? So we had to do technology programs using either the 3D printer or CNC machine or vinyl cutter or something like that. And the 3D printers were taking so long, I couldn't do a program because it would be like a 3-hour program. So and no kid's going to stay focused. So I ended up using our vinyl cutter to make stencils so we could do a screen print program. And then I had so many, I took the age limit off of it, just said child and caregiver. And we had so many like grandparents and parents with their kids, and like aunts and uncles coming in and with their nieces and nephews. And so it was like, in that process, the kids were learning, but also the adults were learning, and therefore the kids were more likely to come back because they had somebody else that was engaged, interested. Had a grandmother and her grandson that came in after that, and they made little T-shirts for him and his buddies. He had a little group of about 5 friends, and they had their little, I didn't understand it. It was a piece of corn and it said, "Now what?" That was their little logo that they had come up with. But
That's
it was
really
just fun
cool.
to see them come back. Like, that's the most rewarding part. The other part that's like you're saying, like, when during COVID, after I came back to the library, I had to take some extra time off with my daughters because we didn't have childcare. And when I got back, the 2 out of our 4 pieces of equipment were broken, and so I was like, I had to, fix them. Which, I mean, I can barely use a hammer, but somehow I did it. Because you do it, you have to do it. When you have to do
Yeah.
something to help somebody, you just have to find a way. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so we were talking about overcrowding. We talked about that a little bit. But I kind of want to get into like the social and economic disparities and sheer number of students, especially the influx in urban areas. We have that overcrowding that we talked about. Um, do you do you see a solution to the that ratio allotment that's causing this current overcrowding? And how would you affect that? How would you
I
help
mean, I
alleviate
think,
that?
the bottom line is that they found that you could take a teacher and they could have more kids, and at least the results on a standardized test were still good enough, and so the bottom line on whoever's on the budget level, it's like, hey, it's working good enough
New
kind of
normal
thing.
that we've
Yeah,
heard a lot.
and like I said, I mean, it really does come back to funding, and we as schools have never received the level of funding again since that recession. And like, I know, like, technical amount money, but with inflation and everything else,
Yeah.
it's just never hit the level for personnel. And I guess that's where they need one of those guidelines that, like you said, it's nice to go outside when you want to do your own thing, but
Mhm.
it's almost like they need to press that it has to be for personnel, whether it be TAs.
So
That's
earmark
another thing,
money.
like the K3, K2, K3 classrooms, they used to have a TA in every single room, or one for every 2 rooms. And I mean, that is just gone, like, it's like 1 TA for 3 or more people, and
Mhm.
those little kids, I mean, it's like herding cats.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So
Yeah.
needing another adult hand is really needed. So and then I just feel like I told you before, like the upper elementary, and then I have friends working in middle school, and I mean, a lot of them are like over 30. When Union County went back to Plan A, they had over 30 kids in a classroom. It's insane to me. I can't imagine doing that. So,
Yeah. Well, we're just now seeing, and maybe in focus in the library world, we're just now seeing 10 years removed from the recession, or a little longer now, that librarian positions are starting to come back. I think it was 2 years ago that I was
yes, you are
looking.
so right.
Yeah. And then when they got librarian roles, there was not the assistant role. And I think in the last couple of years, I've started seeing where my local elementary school here, Matthews Elementary, has hired a assistant, because they think that whoever's in charge of finance sees, well, one person is getting it done, so, and they're not aware of the pressure and the amount of workload that they're putting on people. I know I saw where
Yeah,
you put that in that write up you sent, that that is that respect idea of the fact that you're not being respected when they're expected to go home and complete all this work. So you're working far more than your traditional 40-hour work week. I mean, that's a huge thing. When I don't know, I don't see how it's going to get better unless there's more demonstrations like we saw a few years back in Raleigh. Um,
yeah, yeah. Well, and sorry, I got too off on the overcrowded. The
mhm,
racial disparity stuff,
mhm,
you know, I grew up when there was busing
mhm.
in the Charlotte area. I don't know if you're, more from this area.
I'm from
I
Monroe.
was I was I lived in like near Matthews area and got driven all the way to like First Ward,
Mhm,
and then even the magnet system started when I was like about in middle school. So these are all things that I think, um, I didn't care about my bus ride when I was that age, and parents get all upset about their child would go so far and, all these kind of things. Um, I do think there's a lot of underlying racism when it really comes down to it, how our schools are so segregated.
mhm.
So I was really disappointed after I got my degree. I came back here. I'd worked in Durham for a couple of years. Um, the segregation of the schools. I basically looked up all the profiles and had a really hard time finding any school that had a mix of races, truthfully.
Mhm.
And I found one, and it was a magnet school. And the magnet schools were kind of dwindling at that point. So I really think um, magnet schools and some level of busing need to come back because people are doing everything they can to, they say they want their kid at a good school.
Right.
Um, and really, a lot of times it has to do with what's the racial mix.
Mhm,
Comes down a lot to what that belief is. Um, so then with that segregation of the schools, um, I just think that then the way things are handled at different schools, I saw within your questions, it was kind of like, do you feel that African Americans are treated differently
mhm.
with,
Discipline and
punishments?
stuff,
And
yeah.
I've definitely seen that. But it's almost because there can be a totally different culture of a school with a high level of African Americans. There is a list of more punitive ways of handling it. And so it's not even that school is being discriminatory of their group because their group is primarily Black and Hispanic.
Mhm,
And so they're doing the same thing to their whole school. And
mhm,
then when I've moved to schools that have a higher percentage of white, there's just a lot more forgiveness, and that's
mhm,
okay. And and maybe some of it has to do with the timing that I've been at different schools and things have changed, but I felt the culture of the administration and the way parents were handled. I think there's always more of a fear at a primarily white school
mhm.
that you don't want to get the parents upset.
Yeah.
And I think that leads to the way things are dealt with.
Mhm,
And then I've had friends that work at really affluent schools, and it was an administrator at a really affluent middle school, and they said the same kind of stuff that you see in the news is happening at like primarily minority schools. The
Mhm.
drugs and these other things are happening at the primarily white schools, but mom and dad get
Mhm.
the lawyers, and their child's not going to get, something put on their record.
Yeah,
Um,
it's really big.
so I think it's that power, you know?
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
that's how I kind of see it play out.
I went to Monroe High School, and we were 60% African American, about 30% Caucasian, and 10% Hispanic, and we had a few Indian kids, but not many. Um, and it was interesting going to that school because I came from a rural school, Forest Hills. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the areas I'm talking about, but and that was Forest Hills was. Um, it was about an even split, maybe a little more Caucasian than African American. But when I went to Monroe, it seemed to me, now I could be my inefficient young mind, but it seemed to me that we all kind of got along. We all hung out together. The school I was referring to, Forest Hills, when I was a sophomore, had a race riot there, which was something that we thought would never happen in the early 2000s. You know what I mean? Like, so late 90s, early 2000s. I'm dating myself, um, but then when I graduated from college, I took as I was trying to find out what I wanted to do. I was substitute teaching, and I was substitute teaching. I won't mention the middle school, but it was in a more rural area, and I went there, and there were 3 Hispanic children in the class, and I noticed this one girl picking on this other Hispanic girl and riling her up. And then the Hispanic girl took it to the physical level where she jumped up, got in her face, that kind of deal. And so I sent them both to the office, and the white girl came back. And then when I went to the office at the end of the day, I was like, "Why did y'all send this girl back to the classroom?" They were both. I wrote them both up, and they said, "Oh, she doesn't do anything wrong. This other one's the behavior issue." And I tried to explain to them, no, what I witnessed was just this, how some people are kind of sneaky about the way they torment other people. And I had 2 older brothers, so I understood that. So, yeah. And when I explained that, I had no support for that. I was just some person off the street that they had called to fill in for a day or 2 or a week or whatever it was. And the discipline issue was going to stay with that Hispanic girl. When you get labeled that way,
Mhm.
it becomes darn near impossible to break that confining of language on you, right? Because you start to internalize it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I am the bad person in this. Yeah, that hurts more than failing a test. That has longer lasting
Yeah.
effects. So we're already kind of talking about it. So how about overall in Socrates Academy, do you feel the teacher student interaction or vice versa? Um, how do you think that how do teachers treat the children, vice versa, children treat the teacher and their peers in a kind of a general sense from what you can see?
Seeing in a specials rotation, you see kids really quickly and short periods of time. But then you get to kind of see them change over the years, which is a neat position to have. See someone go from a first, second, third grade. The dynamics are interesting. I would say our school is primarily white.
Hmm.
Within that population, there is a decent number of Russians that um, English is a second language. So there's that slight minority there, even though you don't see it as prevalent.
Right.
And we have a small African American, and we have a kind of large size of Indian population. So I just I don't see a huge issue within the bullying, but that's, my
Okay.
perspective and not like the homeroom teacher that kind of sees them all
Mhm.
day kind of thing. The issue I see with the culture at our school, it's kind of an interesting scenario, is they have an American homeroom teacher
Mhm.
and they have a Greek teacher that comes in and usually gets moved around to different places. So they don't have as much of like a home base. Um, and then a lot of the Greek teachers don't have that same type of ideas of all the American ways of like dealing with discipline. It's kind of what we would consider old school, like
Mhm.
stop this, get out, or
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
kind of thing. So there's actually an issue with the way our students start to treat our Greek staff. When they're really young, it's cute and the colors and the songs and this, that, and the other. But the students start realizing that Greek doesn't matter. It's not a test. And they can kind of get away with being loosey goosey sometimes and things like that. Um, so I see more of a disrespect for Greek teachers and the Greek culture by the students because it doesn't go within their regular. I have one of my good friends at the school who's a Greek teacher. She teaches higher level math courses, but
Mhm.
then she also has had to teach Greek math because she's one of the few people that knows Greek and can do that too. And she says she'll have the same students at the two different times of day, one being labeled Greek math, and the kids just act like ridiculous and they
Huh.
don't want to do any work. But then when it's her like math two time and they know that like it's considered important, then they like are a totally different student to her, the same person. So that's the issue kind of with the culture at our school, which is, kind of totally different than I would think almost any school. And I've been able to kind of compare that to um, my daughter's in the Spanish immersion program at um, at Shiloh. And so the Spanish speaking teacher is the homeroom teacher. They are, the important person of that kid's life, they
Mhm.
are. And so I feel like the way our school is set up, because the American teacher is the homeroom teacher, it's even like
Right.
if it was
It's the
specials, like
Mhm.
I would tell the homeroom teacher that there had been, there's that power.
Power. That's what I was
Um,
yeah, that's what I was hearing there is that if we put an emphasis on respect of other cultures regardless, then that instances of disrespect would go down. Or perhaps even if you just place the person in an authoritative setting like homeroom teacher, then you would see those kind of instances of disrespect. So you said you don't see much bullying amongst peer to peer, though. Uh,
no, I don't. And again, I'm not saying that it's not there. I don't see much of it. I see a lot of caring behavior. I think that there's certainly bullying going on in the nation and everything. In my opinion, I feel like we've actually moved forward. I think this happens with a lot of things that when it's kind of exposed and talked about as a nation,
mhm.
it's easy to think that maybe it's more of a problem. But like, I remember being mercilessly bullied, in fifth grade myself, and it was just never talked about, and I didn't really have an outlet.
Right.
Um, and I know, like, that you mentioned that there's still people that feel like they don't have an outlet, but I'm close with the counselor at our school. we are trying lots of things to make sure kids feel like that they can report things. Um, we have something called Bark that alerts us anytime there's a chance of like bullying, or someone seeming suicidal. Um, to me, I think maybe the mental health thing is a bigger issue, and maybe
Okay.
that's the whole pandemic, but I don't really know if it is because I mean, I don't know that it truly was about the pandemic. I got way more alert notifications that there was someone depressed and suicidal, and none of it, when you read it, looked like it came down to something to do with bullying. But, and that could
Well,
have been a piece,
do you
I
think
don't know.
you think perhaps that kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the amount of pressure on children? Do you feel like there's perhaps too much pressure, too much emphasis on these, standardized testings, these EOGs, and like when you mentioned earlier about hearing some of the things a third grader says, that touched me because I have a niece that I remember when she was now she's in fifth grade going in sixth, so she's a lot better with the EOGs. But I do remember that when she was in third and fourth grade, the amount of anxiety that went into it, that she was showing physical responses from that, like physically getting sick from the anxiousness from having to take these EOGs. And I
And
don't
I
know.
have regrets, truthfully, of things that I did as a fifth grade teacher that I felt was helping kids understand how important it was, helping them focus, helping them this, that, and the other. The way I talked about the test, that now I see when a teacher is doing very similar things that I did and how that affects my daughter, who's, very high achieving.
Mhm.
And I'm just like, when I talk to her personally, I'm like, you do not need to be worried about these tests.
Yeah,
You're fine,
life keeps going
you
on.
know? But it's almost like the more high achieving students are the ones that internalize it and worry about it more.
Yes, yes.
Um, so yeah, but all of them do. I guess truthfully, at the same time, I've seen the opposite end of the spectrum, the kids having to retake it. You're like, "You poor things."
Yeah,
It
I
was the
know.
last day of school, and we were having, like, parties,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
the class was waiting for those kids to get back, but you're like, "Okay, this is supposed to be an enjoyable, like, last day of school memory, and here you are, answering questions on a computer at the
So when
beginning
you
of the
when
day."
you
So
see peers making those same mistakes or same decisions that you did that you don't think that were the best looking in hindsight, what are some things that you do to kind of coach or mentor or help some of these teachers?
see, and the only thing I've seen is my daughter's own teacher,
Okay,
and
yeah. So it's not really happening. Yeah,
I would never, do that. Because of course I feel like I would never want to be that parent,
yeah,
giving a teacher a hard time about
right.
things. Um, but yeah, I mean, basically, just when I have conversation with friends, I'll bring up the scenario about my daughter, like just kind of
Yes,
giving, kind of like me talking to you, like more just sharing my story of my realization of like the difference and the change. And you mentioned the no homework thing, and again, like I gave lots of homework when I was a young single teacher.
hmm,
I loved Ron Clark. Um, and I know he gave lots of homework. I don't know. He's like a Teach for America, and now he's like got his own school and everything.
hmm,
Um, but now when I see the homework, when I started to see the homework come home and the stress it puts on our family life, um, and I just, yeah, I'm like, we don't, families don't need that. I do see
right.
that other perspective. And my daughter was pretty able to handle it herself, so I can only imagine all the parents that, sit there one thing after the other. And that's what's so interesting too, my daughter being in the Spanish immersion program. People give people such a hard time about, like, parents can't even help their kids with homework. Well, it was by second
Do
grade that there
math. There's
wasn't
a
much
whole.
I could help with my daughter either. So it's
Right.
very interesting to kind of see that perspective,
Mhm.
where typically you would consider me someone who could always, help a kid with their homework kind of thing. So it definitely kind of gives you a different perspective in seeing it.
Right. I can when I think about homework, and my child's my oldest is just about to start kindergarten, so I'm speaking outside of current knowledge. So just looking back, I can look back on my own youth, and I can tell you some fun projects that I did in school. I can tell you like some group projects that I did, but I can't tell you the Wednesday night homework from April 15th. You know what I mean? It's like, because it's filler, a lot of it. I feel like I remember sitting there and helping my mother-in-law, and even a friend of mine that taught at Monroe High School after we graduated. He would get so swamped with the homework that he was assigning that I would sit there on a Friday night at 23 years old and grade papers with him. And I look back and I'm like, what was I doing? Why, why didn't we go to the movies or do something fun? But a lot of
I
times it was check mark.
learned that giving homework passes or a night of no homework benefited me as well.
Right,
So,
right, right.
like with the
And if you
not having to check it over, not having to worry about it, not
Mhm.
having a stack of papers that were turned in and
Sure.
you didn't turn yours in, let me mark
Yeah,
it out. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. That I just think that is counterproductive. It makes them kind of resent having to do the work, and then we're talking about lifelong learners. That works contrary to that notion. Um,
Yeah.
so we talked a bit about persons of color, about the disciplinary and disproportionate disciplinary actions. Um, uh, this concept I just stumbled on and have been researching the restorative justice approach. Do you feel your school does more of that, where it's not based on discipline, but more about a dialogue, or um,
I think there's kind of a mix. There is that, what you got to draw the line
mhm,
at things like weapons,
egregious
physical,
actions? Yeah.
that kind of thing. So there's definitely that point. I think, when I was in middle school, I actually got to be a peer mediator. And so I was trained in all of that. It sounds like I tried to look up restorative justice and I had like a, basic idea of it, before looking it up, but I've never been at a school that very specifically, honed in on that way of doing things. But I feel like, just like everything, it has some connection to other things. Our counselor did something, a couple years ago where she had every kid take a survey of, do you feel like you have somebody who cares about you at school? And that seemed connected to the restorative justice, because it sounded like that first layer is want to build the relationships. I think that has been pushed very strongly at my school. I think that's been something that's pushed at a lot of schools. um you know it's interesting to reframe things myself, because I never thought of a teacher growing up as supposed to being having some connection with me.
Hmm.
Um, and so I feel like, we all in our generation, we have to kind of change things as well.
Right.
And it's nice being that special area teacher. I don't think we get to be as close to kids the way you would in a homeroom, and you don't develop it as much, but you are kind of always that positive person for them. because you do kind of the fun stuff and they see you once a week. It's like every day when I open the door at the morning carpool, like kids always give me the report of, I get to see you later today, or
That's
I'll see
nice.
you Tuesday.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
coming
yeah.
So it's like I have to have a relationship with over 500 kids, but I feel like at least it's positive if they're excited to come see me, but it's not necessarily that deeper level that a lot of the homeroom teachers can have. Um, and then, you know, I felt like when I was a homeroom teacher, that was important to me, kind of like you talked about. When you see those situations, it takes a while to realize that a lot of the big reactive behavior always had a start. And it
Mhm.
is unlikely that the big reactive behavior is that it was really someone else, that started it. So, I just learned a lot by watching other teachers that it was never called restorative justice.
Right.
But I just absolutely loved one of my good friends. Her name's Cindy. She's much older than me and she's retired. But just watching her, she would just bring a kid over and she's just as sweet and lovely to them. And they did something, during class that she was really ticked about. She's just like, so tell me more about this. What's going on? And sometimes she would talk to them individually, and sometimes it would be together. The restorative justice thing is, I've tried to do that thing together, kind of like when I was the peer mediator. And a lot of kids still have trouble. I think they would have to be trained in it first, and I'd have to teach them this is what's going to happen. And it works a lot better talking one-on-one with the kids, so they really do feel like they got their story and their piece and being heard. So kids have a really hard time letting the other person talk when it's, that agitation. But I do think it's the right way to handle things, because there is a lot of times another layer to the whole situation for sure.
Well, exactly. I understand.
So,
So we're running out of time, unfortunately. I wanted to get through a couple other things on technology, but I'm gonna have to share it another
okay. Well, yeah,
time.
let me hear something about the technology. I realize that's near and dear to my heart. And then I'll
Okay.
the
Well,
role of technology.
okay. Let me go ahead and wrap us up, and then if you'll
Yep.
just kind of touch briefly on what you see as the role of technology, how you saw an impact with COVID-19, and perhaps kind of end us on where you see education going in the future. But so we've been talking with Alex Keilen.
Keilen.
All right, my English education is coming through. So you came highly recommended from a mutual friend of ours, Jess McFadden, counselor at Union County Early College. So when I told her about this project, she was emphatic that you were the perfect choice. Now I see
Wow.
exactly why. But in her words, she said, "You're awesome and an amazing person." And I'm glad to see that Jess does not fib. And now, after this interview, I appreciate you carving out the time so early in the morning and answering a stranger's questions, drinking coffee, trying to become human again. Um, so I can truly see why Jess said all those wonderful things about you, and I've got a glimpse into how excellent of an educator you are. But to be an excellent educator, it starts with being an excellent person, which now I know you are. So thank you so much. And if you'll just take us out on the role of technology, how you saw it impacted with COVID-19, and maybe the future of education. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, no, it's near and dear to my heart. I've been teaching computer skills the last several years. I think too many people think it should just be integrated, and I think that is a mistake. I think people want kids to just pick up on the technology skills. They're like, oh, they're on the iPads all the time anyway. It's not the same thing. I am still teaching kids how to make a proper, like, PowerPoint presentation style, like the things that you actually need for educational needs. And I think it's kind of like the whole phonics idea where they thought the kids didn't really need those direct skills. And now they've found that they actually do, or at least a big chunk of 20% of the population does. So there's this group of kids that are going to pick up on the technology skills that are important for education and business all on their own. But we need to care about the kids that are not going to do that on their own. And there's actually a large chunk of them. It's at least 20%, just like the phonics. And so I don't think we should just say, oh, just integrate it with social studies and have them do that PowerPoint presentation. Regular teachers don't have time to teach, this is how you do this in the technology part. I think it's just one of those other things that they want to dump on the classroom teacher. And unfortunately, there's not enough of them that know all the ins and out and particulars, and it should still be concentrated as skills that they need to develop, just like everything else. And I think it's a huge piece. Kids need to learn coding. It's the new literacy. They need to understand the background and the more business and educational aspects of technology and where that can take you and the behind the scenes stuff. And we need to stop assuming just because a kid can find their game on an iPad and how to take a selfie doesn't mean that they are really technology savvy and that they can do things in the future business world. So I think technology is really important, and I think we're making some mistakes in assuming that it is just gonna take care of itself, you know? So
All right, that's very interesting. How about the future of education?
that's it.
Still going in technology based? Everything going to be technology based in the future of education, or you think maybe the balance, what you were kind of talking
I
about?
think, I think there needs to be a balance for sure. I think we need kids off screens and doing things that are creative. I think we need them outside. I think we need them caring about the world in other ways. And then I think instead of just engaging in the games and the playfulness of technology, we need them learning the deeper, like, how are we making that
Yeah, yeah,
stuff?
okay.
And so that's where I think education needs to go towards, is we've really got to help kids learn what's going on behind the scenes and be able to create. I
Uh-huh.
want them to be able to create in
Yeah,
technology, and I
yeah.
want them to be able to create without technology, I
Uh-huh.
guess.
Mm-hmm. That's
So
very interesting.
that would be my vision. I hope that we can go there. I don't think that's the exact where people are going, but I think some certainly are.
Yeah,
So
and you as a technology educator, and then you have your media coordinator. Y'all all can get together with willing teachers to kind of put together a lesson plan that's not strictly through paper,
yeah,
and
yeah.
grades. Well, Alex, thank you so much for meeting with me this morning. I really
Yeah,
appreciate
thank you. It was fun.
it. Take care. Have a good rest of your day.
All right. Bye.